By the early 2010s, .tk domains were showing up in roughly 1/5 of all phishing attacks measured by anti-phishing researchers. The island those domains were registered to didn't even know they were doing it. A guy in the Netherlands did. For over a decade, .tk was at times the largest country code domain on Earth and second only to .com overall. Bigger than China, bigger than Germany, bigger than the UK. It was the country code for Tokelau. And if you have never heard of Tokelau, that is entirely the point. Tokelau is a non-self-governing territory of New Zealand, 3 coral atolls in the South Pacific, 10 square kilometers of land total. You could walk across the entire territory in an afternoon. About 1,500 people live there. There is no airport. New Zealand's government literally spent $3 million studying whether they could build an 800-meter runway on Nukunonu, the largest atoll. They eventually scrapped it. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs deemed it economically and logistically impossible. To get to Tokelau, you fly to Samoa first. Then you wait for the MV Mataliki, a government-owned freighter that sails 2 or 3 times a month, and you ride the open ocean for up to 32 hours. When you arrive, there's no dock, no deep water harbor. You transfer to a small barge mid-ocean and navigate through a narrow reef channel just to reach the shore. If the weather turns, you are stranded for weeks. Before any of this started, the island's power grid shut off at midnight. They had radio telephone links to Samoa, no local internet infrastructure whatsoever. Its entire GDP for most of its modern history was roughly $1.5 million, mostly from exporting dried coconut meat and selling commemorative postage stamps. This is the physical Tokelau. Hold it in your head. By the mid-2010s, this tiny disconnected strip of coral was sitting on about 31 million registered domains. 31 million. That is roughly 20,000 domain registrations for every single person living on the island. For scale, China's .cn had 16.8 million. Germany's .de had 16 million. Tokelau, with no airport and a power grid that used to turn off at midnight, had at times the largest country code domain on Earth. At its peak, it was second only to .com overall. This was not a coincidence, it was an extraction operation, and it started with a very specific kind of sales pitch and a very specific institutional moment. In the early 2000s, a Dutch internet entrepreneur named Joost Zoerbier flew to Samoa, took the long boat to Tokelau, and sat down with the island's telecommunications company, a company called Teletalk, and made an offer. The pitch was almost insultingly simple. The internet had already assigned Tokelau a 2-letter country code, .tk. ICANN and the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority carve up the namespace by country code, and Tokelau, completely isolated, no internet infrastructure, functionally no awareness of the administrative layer of how this worked, had been handed a global digital asset they didn't even know existed. Teletalk's general manager at the time, Agostino Vitali, later said the island essentially discovered it had a .tk domain through Zoerbier's visit. There's actually a specific institutional receipt for this moment. In 2006, IANA formally redelegated the .tk registry to Teletalk, Tokelau's government-run telecom, with Tokelau government oversight. The paperwork put Tokelau nominally in control of its own namespace. In practice, Teletalk had already contracted the entire operation out to Zoerbier's company years earlier. By the time the formal redelegation arrived, the commercial rights had already been handed over. The bureaucratic recognition showed up after the extraction had already started. His company, which would eventually rebrand as Freedom, would take total technical and commercial control of the .tk registry. They'd run the servers, handle the DNS, manage the global distribution. What did Tokelau get in return? Zoerbier told them a certain amount of money and some internet infrastructure. What that meant in practice? He shipped over some internet routers, reportedly bought on eBay for around $50 each, installed them on the island, and for the first time, Tokelauans living abroad in New Zealand could make cheap VoIP calls home. That was the modernization. $50 eBay routers. In exchange, Tokelau handed over the commercial rights to their entire national digital identity. Freedom told the rest of the world a very different story. Zorbier gave media interviews claiming he was single-handedly adding 10% to Tokelau's GDP every year. Freedom's official mission statement described championing the freedom of expression and the free flow of ideas over the internet. When they later expanded into Africa and launched the free.ml domain in Mali, they announced it in partnership with Mali's IT agency. The official press release celebrated the fact that Mali had gone from a few hundred registered domains to 350,000 almost overnight. A revolution in digital access, they said, bridging the digital divide for students and small businesses in the developing world who can't afford a $15 .com registration. We made the internet free, we made it frictionless. Therefore, we are the heroes. Call it what it is, the PR offset mirage. You write a glowing PDF about digital charity, you put it in front of every regulator who starts looking closely, and you use it to blind them to the warehouse fire you're running in the background. The actual revenue Tokelau received, based on journalist Michael Field's calculation, which has been the most rigorous independent estimate on record, was approximately 140,000 New Zealand dollars per year. 140,000 New Zealand dollars
for 1,500 people. That is roughly 87 New Zealand dollars per person annually, about 60 US dollars. Telefini Inosa, who ran Teletalk for years during the Freedom era, later told MIT Technology Review directly that Zorbier's claim about adding 10% to Tokelau's GDP was, in his words, nonsense and a lie. The income was very small, negligible. Zorbier was publicly telling the press he was transforming a nation's economy. The head of the nation's own telecom was calling it pocket change. The gap between those two statements is where the entire grift lived. When you registered a free.tk domain, you didn't own it. Under Freedom's terms of service, heavily insulated, written by lawyers, you were granted a temporary, precarious license, not ownership, a license. Buried in that license was an activity requirement. Your domain had to generate consistent web traffic, or Freedom maintained the unilateral right to take it back. On paper, a reasonable anti-spam measure. In practice, a harvesting mechanism. Developer forums from that era are full of the same story, told in different languages from different countries. You register a free.tk, you build something legitimate, a small web tool, a portfolio site, a blog that starts gaining traction. You spend 6 months on SEO, you build backlinks, you drive real human traffic. The second your site became genuinely valuable, Freedom's automated systems triggered. No warning, no email, and definitely no appeals process. Just an account locked and a domain stripped. And then Freedom parked it. They didn't wipe it from the DNS, they repointed the records to a server they controlled. All of that traffic you built, every bookmark, every backlink, every returning visitor, suddenly hit a blank page plastered with programmatic ads. You did the SEO labor, they hijacked the equity. Sit with that for a second. The contract literally defined low traffic as justification for seizure, and the people setting the threshold for what counted as low traffic were also the people collecting the ad revenue when your domain got taken. That is not an accident in contract drafting. That is the contract working exactly as intended. This wasn't some unfortunate side effect, it was the entire business model. Freedom was running tens of millions of domains simultaneously. Even if a small percentage of them built real traffic before getting seized, the aggregate was astronomical. Millions of users every day mistyping URLs, clicking broken backlinks, trying to visit a .tk site they'd bookmarked 6 months ago. Freedom routed all of it through ad exchanges. And it wasn't harmless banner ads. Security research from that era found that parked domain traffic was increasingly being routed to scareware, fake antivirus subscriptions, and direct malware payloads, with Freedom's parking infrastructure sitting upstream from chains of ad brokers that resold the traffic down to increasingly bad actors. Freedom collected the revenue. The third-party advertising partners got the legal exposure. The legitimate users were the raw material. The seized domains were the product. The criminals downstream were the paying customers. That was the first business. The second business made it look quaint. Cybercrime has infrastructure costs. If you want to run a phishing campaign at scale, you need domain names. In a normal environment, you buy them, with stolen credit cards usually or laundered crypto. Every time a security firm detects your domains and blacklists them, you lose money. You burn infrastructure and buy more. There is friction, and that friction is part of what keeps the problem from being infinite. Freedom's zero-cost API deleted that friction entirely. Why burn a stolen card when you can programmatically spin up 10,000 fresh .tk domains in a single afternoon for free? When one batch gets blacklisted, you register 10,000 more. Same day, zero cost. I want to be completely precise here. Anti-phishing researchers in the early 2010s documented that .tk was consistently appearing in somewhere between 20 and 28% of malicious domain registrations they tracked, making it, by a significant margin, the most abused namespace on Earth at the time. Freedom was the problem. Freedom's response was to expand to Africa. By 2021, the Interrile Consulting Group's annual audit found that the 5 country codes Freedom operated, .tk, .ml, .ga, .cf, and .gq, made up half of the top 10 most abused top-level domains on Earth. 5 country codes, half the top 10. In late 2022, data aggregated from Spamhaus, PhishTank, APWG, and multiple global block lists reached a number that should have ended the company on the spot.
Around 60% of phishing domains reported across country code domains in late 2022 were running on Freedom namespaces. 60%. One private Dutch company, operating from country codes leased from some of the poorest territories on the planet, running the majority of the world's active phishing infrastructure. A2 Hosting, a completely ordinary web hosting provider, typically saw fewer than 2,000 IPs reported for phishing in a normal quarter. In late 2022, that number hit nearly 30,000, almost entirely driven by bad actors registering free Freedom domains and pointing them to A2 servers. A2 was drowning in someone else's abuse and eating the full customer service bill. This was the system working as designed. Subsidize the scammers, harvest the residual traffic, skim the arbitrage margins, toss 87 USD per person back to Tokelau so the local telecom stays quiet and grateful. The strangest part of the entire operation wasn't the scale. It was the fact that for a certain kind of user, Freedom was legitimately useful. Hacker news threads from after the shutdown are full of people who sound weirdly nostalgic about Freedom. Kids who built their first website on a free .tk because they had no credit card. Hobbyists in countries where $15 was not nothing. Small nonprofits in sub-Saharan Africa that had no other viable option for a real domain. Freedom was genuinely the only on-ramp that existed for a lot of legitimate tiny users. That dual reality is part of why it survived so long. The legitimate use cases gave the PR story just enough truth to hold. The regulators who might have acted found themselves looking at a company that was, by some measure, doing exactly what it claimed, bringing people online who couldn't otherwise afford it. The fact that it was simultaneously running the majority of the world's phishing infrastructure was the part that required receipts to prove. The regulators didn't bring the receipts, so Freedom kept running. ICANN, nominally responsible for the internet's namespace, occasionally issued compliance notices. In 2015, they put Freedom on a 90-day suspension for trafficking in trademark-infringing names. 90 days. I didn't clock how absurd that was until I read it a second time. By 2015, .tk had been the most abused domain namespace on Earth for the better part of a decade. ICANN's answer was a 90-day timeout. Not a license revocation, not a structural audit. A timeout. The kind of consequence you give a kid who talks back in class. ICANN's interventions came late and were far weaker than the scale of abuse suggested. This was not an oversight. The governance structure of ICANN is decentralized by design, which makes it genuinely difficult to act decisively against the registry operator who keeps filing paperwork and deploying lawyers. Difficult, not impossible. But the result was the same. For a decade after the abuse data became undeniable, the institutional response was notices, committees, consultation periods. Every time regulators looked closely, Zorbier deployed the PR shield. Any serious attempt to shut down freedom was immediately framed as a Western attack on the digital sovereignty of impoverished developing nations, on the freedom of expression of fragile micro-territories, on the economic lifelines of islands like Tokelau. The same $50 eBay routers he'd shipped to the island in 2003 were still doing diplomatic work in regulatory hearings 20 years later. The decentralized governance of the internet proved completely, laughably useless against a guy who figured out how to weaponize digital charity as a regulatory shield. So the network kept running right up until Freenom made one specific, fatal mistake. They offloaded too much of their cost onto a company with better lawyers. Meta. For years, cybercriminals had been using free Freenom domains to build fake Facebook and Instagram portals. The Meta complaint named specific strings that were in active use: Facebook00b.ga, fb-instagram.cf, Facebook-applogin.ga, Instagram.ml, chatwhatsapp.com.tk with 2 A's in WhatsApp, the kind of typo that passes in a text message preview. Each of those strings is a credential harvesting page waiting to happen. A user clicks, lands on something that looks exactly like a login screen, types their password, and hands it over. The domain cost the attacker nothing. The Freenom registration portal was open 24 hours a day. Meta had been filing abuse complaints with Freenom for years. Freenom's documented response to some of those complaints was to take the infringing domain and park it, generating advertising revenue off the very traffic that had just been used to steal user credentials. They were monetizing Meta's phishing victims. Meta didn't go to ICANN. They went to federal court in Northern California. In December 2022, they filed a sealed complaint. When the judge refused to keep it sealed, Meta withdrew, rewrote, and on March 3, 2023, filed a detailed public amended complaint specifically designed to be read. 5,000 specific counts of cybersquatting under the Anti-Cybersquatting Consumer Protection Act. Statutory maximum $100,000 per infringement. $500 million in potential liability. And the legal strategy was sharper than just the number. Meta's lawyers didn't just sue Freenom, they named the entire architecture: YourSafe, ID Shield, Freedom Registry, FinTag, Servacia, and Joost Zorbier Management Services BLV, a web of Dutch holding entities that Meta argued was deliberately engineered to hide assets and insulate the people running the operation from personal liability. They also issued subpoenas targeting 20 John Doe defendants, the specific, high-volume Freenom customers running the largest phishing syndicates against Meta's users. The message to those customers: we are identifying you. March 3, 2023. The complaint is public. Within days, the Freenom registration portal went dark. They replaced it with a message saying new registrations were temporarily unavailable due to, and I want you to sit with this for a second, technical issues. A company that had been running the majority of the world's phishing infrastructure for a decade posted a vague error message and went quiet. The effect on the internet was immediate and measurable. In the months following the registration freeze, Freenom's share of phishing domains and anti-abuse tracking dropped from around 60% of reported ccTLD phishing down to under 15%. One lawsuit, one registration freeze, the internet got measurably cleaner, not because of regulation, not because of law enforcement, but because one company with good lawyers cut off the free supply chain. Then the sequence accelerated. November 2023, ICANN formally terminated the registrar accreditation of OpenTLD, the entity through which Freenom operated, citing long-standing systemic breaches of its operating agreements. The organization that had issued a 90-day suspension in 2015 and then watched 8 more years of accelerating abuse eventually revoked the license. Progress, apparently. February 12, 2024, Freenom capitulated. They settled with Meta on confidential monetary terms and announced their independent decision to exit the domain name business entirely. Then came the Great Purge. March 2024, Freenom initiated a mass deletion of its active zone files, about 12.6 million domains, the bulk of their resolving namespace, concentrated across .tk, .cf, and .gq, were shut down and rendered completely inaccessible. Netcraft tracked the event in real time. Cloudflare, which had been providing DNS hosting for a vast share of those free sites, recorded a 22% drop in its total number of globally hosted domains over a matter of days. 22% of Cloudflare's entire global hosted portfolio gone because one Dutch registry operator clicked delete. Their press team had no public statement. The African nations that had handed their country codes to Freenom revoked their agreements as fast as they could move. Mali, Gabon, the Central African Republic, Equatorial Guinea, all trying to claw back namespaces that had spent years being synonymous with the worst of the internet. This wasn't a separate chapter from the Tokelau story, it was the same playbook replicated. Find a small, economically fragile territory, license their country code, give them $50 routers and a glowing press release, run the grift until someone bigger notices. Gabon's .ga, the Central African Republic's .cf, each one was a Tokelau situation dressed in different geography. And then, Tokelau. Tealofi Enosa, the man who ran their telecom while all of this was happening, later told a journalist that what Zorbir was really doing was selling Tokelau's reputation and its morality. Not its GDP, not its digital future, its reputation and its morality. For NZD 87 per person per year. Today, the .tk domain space is effectively frozen. New registrations are unavailable. The developers who actually built legitimate things on .tk, nonprofits in emerging markets, small tools, student projects that had no other affordable option are in limbo. The Freenom support infrastructure has vanished. Tokelau's government, through Teletalk, has been reported as negotiating with Internet NZ, the entity that manages New Zealand's .nz registry, for help taking back control of .tk and establishing a functioning registry after Freenom's exit. What that transition actually looks like and when it completes is not yet public. What is clear is that the revenue stream that Freenom provided, however modest it actually was, is gone. Freenom built a $500 million corporate liability on the back of an island whose entire macroeconomy is smaller than a mid-sized suburban car dealership. The guy in the Netherlands settled on confidential terms and walked away. The global scammers migrated to the next cheap provider. The African nations are quietly rebuilding their digital reputations. And the island of 1,500 people, sitting 32 hours by sea from the nearest port, was left with a frozen domain, a damaged reputation it didn't earn, and a legal and technical mess it has no infrastructure to fix. The internet's biggest governance failure wasn't a technical exploit, it wasn't a zero-day vulnerability, it wasn't some sophisticated nation-state operation. It was a Dutch entrepreneur with $50 eBay routers and a really good PDF about digital charity. Stay toasty.